Hi guys, I have made this video for you which shows a variety of different colors I've mixed out for a portrait painting. Now with portraits it's usually kind of a variety of neutrals that you're mixing out, and I mixed quite a few colors out. Part of that is just considering what kind of color scheme I want, right? So we can think back to our color wheels and you can sort of start to decide what you want the color scheme of your painting to be like, considering the color wheel. So you might want to go with complementary color scheme, for example. So that's one reason why I'm mixing out a variety of colors. Another reason is that there's different sort of color zones to the face, and you need some different varieties of colors and temperatures according to the part of the face that you're painting. So generally, and I'll include photos of all of this within this page as well, but generally this section of the face leans more towards yellow. This section, especially like cheeks, nose, ears, lean more towards red, and the lower part of the face is going to go cooler or more towards a blue. So there's some artists that make that really extreme and chromatic color, which you might be doing depending upon the artist that you chose for your project. And there's other artists that can do that in a very neutralized way, but that neutral might just lean towards a particular color. So it's a neutral that has a bluish tinge to it, right? I'm using a whole variety of colors. Now I just want to be introducing you to those different colors, and I also want to encourage you to look at the colors that you have. Maybe you bought some new colors recently and try experimenting with those. And to create those different neutrals, think of those complementary color combinations. That is what is going to be creating a neutral for you, combining those opposite colors together. But there's so many different types of colors. They're going to give you all different types of neutrals. One example that I go over in the video is ultramarine blue and burnt umber or transparent iron oxide is going to make a very dark neutral, which you can then push either warm or cool, and you can make a whole value scale of. If you combine a cobalt blue, though, which is a very light blue, and a cadmium orange, which is a super chromatic orange, that's the same type of complementary color combination, but it's going to give you a much lighter neutral to begin with. And it's also going to be a neutral that is a more intense color than that ultramarine blue and burnt umber, which would also still be that kind of blue and orange combination. So there's lots of different neutrals. I want you to check this out. You know, you might be inspired to try some of the combinations I'm showing here, and also experiment with what you have and see what you can create on your own. At the very end of the video, I accidentally recorded part of it in a different style, so some of my narration was lost. Just please know that I was mixing some cooler neutrals using phthalo green and alizarin crimson. So that's what's going on there, so I'm sorry about the end of that. I'm going to gradually be getting better at making videos. So thanks for your patience, guys. I hope this helps you, and I also want to see the projects you're working on and help you as much as possible. Also, that was Finley. You'll probably be seeing Finley and Wednesday, my cats, pretty frequently. Alright guys, thanks.
Alright guys, I'm going to do a mixing demo showing you how to mix out some different skin tones. I have a ton of paint out right now, as you can see. I'm not going to be using all of that today. I'm just going to be showing you some different options. So we're going to focus on a quinacridone yellow-green combination, doing some skin tones that lean towards red and yellow, and then we also want some cooler neutrals to be working with as well for our skin tones. So I also grabbed out some things like this transparent gold ochre is a really interesting color to use for skin tones. If you want to push something a little more towards yellow, and the transparency of it keeps it nice and subtle. Hansa yellow is another transparent yellow, which is really useful to use. And I brought out some interesting mediums that we can talk about as well, such as this cold wax medium, which I really love. We'll go into that more in depth in the next couple of lessons. So let's start off though by mixing some stuff out. So let's kind of talk about why we want all these different skin tones. So the zones, the face has different zones to it that lean towards different colors, okay? And I will be putting up a lecture that's going to go over those different zones, and we'll show you lots of different examples. But essentially we want to, and this also depends on the skin tone of the model, the sort of mood that you're going for, but you're going to want to give yourself a variety of things to work with. Essentially something that can lean towards a redder skin tone, something that can lean towards more yellow skin tone, and then also some cooler or more blue skin tones as well. Okay, skin tones are also essentially just like combinations of neutrals. Okay, just like how in beginning painting and over the semester we've talked about mixing out neutrals. Skin tones are no different. And in fact, skin tones are really just like a series of different neutral combinations. So with this, for example, I have red and green paired together. This quinacridone magenta, which is acting like a red, paired with yellow-green. You could also use green-gold. Those two colors are complementary color combinations. When you start to combine them together, they neutralize each other, they make that chroma less intense, right? But they're neutrals that you can push towards different colors, so you can make it a little bit warmer, a little bit cooler. You can push it more towards pink or more towards that yellow, sort of green end of the spectrum, depending on what you need. And all these different neutral combinations are just going to give you lots of options to be using as we're painting out portraits. Okay, so I'm also doing, so the quinacridone magenta and the yellow-green can make a very intense kind of neutral, which is almost sort of a paradox, but it's a neutral that still can stay pretty intensely colorful, whereas this is more of a kind of earth tone combination, burnt umber, yellow ochre, and cadmium red. That's going to be much more neutralized neutral. Strange thing to say, but there is a spectrum there with the neutrals. Okay, and then I'm also going to do a alizarin crimson and phthalo green neutral, because what I want to be doing for my own portrait is sort of basing it off of red and green. So to mix out these different neutrals, you can be considering the different complementary color combinations that you can put together to create neutralized colors. And that could be any combination that you're thinking of. So if you're thinking of blue and orange, that could be ultramarine blue and burnt umber, for example. The burnt umber kind of acting like the orange. Or you could even be combining other types of blues and oranges to create neutrals, such as this cobalt blue, which is a very light, intensely chromatic blue, and a cadmium orange, which is also intensely chromatic. These are both light colors. You combine them together, you're going to get more of a mid-tone neutral, and it's going to be more chromatic than something like an ultramarine blue and a transparent red oxide. Those colors instead are going to go much darker and much more like a blacker gray, whereas these are going to be a different kind of more chromatic gray. Okay, so to create those neutrals, you want to think of complementary colors, but then even within the color scheme of your painting, you can be thinking of complementary color combinations as well. So you can think of pushing your light mass towards one kind of color. So for me, I'm going to be thinking of pushing my light mass towards more of like a pink or a red, and then with my shadow mass, I'm going to think of pushing that more towards a green. Okay, so that's thinking of my color scheme and kind of fitting it into a complementary color scheme. You could do the same thing thinking of blues and oranges, or yellow and purple. Okay, it doesn't mean that entire light or that entire shadow mass has to be one color, but it can be kind of leaning towards that color. And again, I will show you examples of what that looks like. Now I'm also putting out some mediums, so I'm putting out some liquid for a medium that's going to make my paint much more fluid and thinner. And then I also put out some cold wax medium, which is going to be a medium that has a lot of body to it, and I'm going to add that to my paint in my light sections and sections that I want to build up the mass. Probably not going to want to do that in your shadow sections. You want to keep that thinner, use a medium like this, but your lights you can build up with a medium like cold wax or something like this, which is an impasto medium. Okay, let's begin mixing. So, and I kind of grouped these different complementary combinations together. I'm going to mix some of this quinacridone magenta together with the yellow green. Okay, and I'm going to do one that leans towards pink and one that leans towards green. Now here I'm using yellow green. You could also use green gold. That is a combination I talked to you all about in class. And then for each of these I'm going to mix out a couple of different values using white to lighten it up. So I just want to give myself a little value scale to work with. It doesn't have to be like that 10-point value scale, which I made all of you do before. It can be, 4 or 5 different values should be totally sufficient. Okay. So this is going to give you a nice rosy skin tone to be working with. That quinacridone magenta and the yellow-green together. Okay, so now I'm going to mix a couple of different values to work with. I'm going to start by mixing something that can be kind of a middle tone, and then I can make something lighter and something darker from it. Okay. Before I go into my other colors, I'm just wiping off my palette knife so I'm not contaminating that whole big part of the color. And then when you add white to these colors too, it can also be a way of really checking that color, because sometimes when you're combining these neutrals together, they get so dark when they're combined together purely. It can be hard to tell what that color is really looking like, so adding the white can let you sort of see that. So this is a very rosy skin tone. So I'm going to keep it that way. I might want to be using this in some sections. For example, in a portrait or in figure painting, ears can go very pink, the cheeks, the nose, those are all sort of redder sections of the face. Let's see. And then on the body itself, the sort of joint areas, so the knuckles can go red, elbows too. So there's different sort of zones to the face and the body which can lean towards different colors. Okay, so you want to mix out at least a couple of values for yourself, and then as you start painting you might also realize, oh, I really need this particular value, and you can mix out that value too. What you want to try to avoid is if you end up trying to mix something every single time from pure pigments, or you're having to remix something quite a bit, that gives you an indication that you need to just stop, take the time to mix kind of a bigger pile of it to use. It's going to pay off in your painting. Your painting will be more consistent, and you won't have to be sort of reinventing that color every single time. Now, pre-mixing colors like this can seem really time intensive, but it can also just really sort of pay off, giving you less work over the course of the painting. So I think I will mix one more color in between this and this. I'm just going to grab some of that and give myself a little step in between. Okay, so give yourself at least a couple of values to be working with. Now I can also use this same combination of colors, but push something more towards that yellow-green. Okay, so I'm grabbing more of that yellow-green. Don't want this to be quite so green. Green is usually not a great skin tone color unless you want something to look kind of sickly. Toulouse-Lautrec did that very effectively in a lot of his works. He was using that intense phthalo green to give some of his figures a kind of sickly look to them. You just want to make sure you're doing that intentionally, not trying to paint someone, make them look beautiful and appealing, and then you're painting them in phthalo green. Probably not going to have the effect that you want. Okay, but you can see it's kind of a warm brown, right? Just from these two colors combined together, you can already see that this could make a really lovely skin tone. So I just want to mix it fully. You can see that there's still some bits of yellow-green that are not fully mixed. This brown is really lovely, but if I don't mix this fully and then I go to paint with this and a little blob of yellow-green comes out, it's not going to have the same effect. So again, just take the time to mix your paints. Okay, let's also test it. So I just kind of want to see what this color looks like a little bit more, so I'm going to add some white and kind of see if I like that skin tone. And yes, I do. And this is a skin tone that, let's mix a big pile of kind of a mid-tone to work with. Okay. Now this is a skin tone that's leaning more towards a kind of yellow-brown. And always keep some of your original combination to work with, because you want to be able to mix more values out from here. Now you don't want to eliminate this entirely. And this could also really work in some really dark shadow areas. Okay. Alright, so So here is our quinacridone yellow-green combination that is leaning more towards the yellow-green side of things. And it's given us a nice warm brown to work with. Okay, so now I can mix out a couple of different values to sort of manipulate. Okay, and then parts of the face that lean towards yellow, big parts of the forehead, and then parts of the chin lean more towards a cool color. Now that's not going to be straight out blue, but you'll want to give yourself some skin tones that are leaning towards blue to cover those different cooler zones of the face. Okay. And then again, what's going to be important is you mix out these values, you mix out these different tones, you're going to test it on your painting, see how it looks, and then see if you need to reassess or come back and mix anything else out. So mix a variety of skin tones, but then test them, and then see if you need to mix more. Don't begin by mixing a ton of stuff that you're not sure you're going to use. So it's important that you're also seeing how things look on your painting, because sometimes something looks one way on your palette, particularly if you have a white palette like me, but then you're painting on a toned surface. These light values, for example, will probably look much brighter on my actual painting. Okay, so we're already getting a nice variety going. So in this combination, I'm going to be mixing out some tones that, one that's leaning more towards our red end of the scale, one that's leaning more towards yellow. So let's start with something that's a little bit more red. Now the cadmium red can be quite strong. Yellow ochre in contrast does not have the same tinting quality as cadmium red, so just keep that in mind as you're mixing. A little bit of cadmium can go a long way. Okay, and then the burnt umber is just going to help to neutralize these combinations even more. So again, skin tones are essentially just a whole combination of different neutrals. So you can experiment with the colors that you have. Think of neutral combinations that you could put together. Those neutral combinations are essentially going to be just different complementary colors combined together. So you can test out all different types of things. I'm showing you some various neutral combinations to use, but you can also come up with your own neutral combinations to try out. With whatever you're doing, you do want to make sure you're making these neutrals and then giving yourself a variety of values to work with. Okay, so we got a nice warm brown here. Okay, let's see what this color looks like with some, that did not mix all the way, so let's go back over here. Okay, so let's see what this color looks like with some white in it. Now, this is a red-brown. When I add white to it, white is cooling, which can be totally fine with skin tones. Because skin tones can be a little pastel-y, right? We've talked about mixing out various colors. If you're looking at a colorful object, you don't always want to be adding white to lighten it. But with skin tones, you're working with a variety of these colors that have been lightened with white. Okay, so that's a nice kind of more red skin tone to work with. Okay, So I'll mix out some different values. This will also be a very useful skin tone to have. Okay. And let's mix one more value at least between these two. Okay, so let's again grab some of this cadmium. I'm going to do less this time because I want this to be more, leaning more towards yellow ochre, and then some of that burnt umber to neutralize. And again, keep these darker tones in here as well. You will need them. There will be parts of the shadow that can go quite dark, but there's still variation of color within the shadows too. I will be showing an example later of hands, a painting I've done of hands, where there's the majority of the shadow is pushing more towards kind of a purple neutral, but there's parts of it where I had to adjust color because, for example, the knuckles of the hand were in the shadow, but the knuckles were leaning more towards a red. So if I want to make those knuckles red in the shadow, it could be using some of this or even some of that. So again, you want to make sure you're keeping some of the original darker neutral combination. Now this is looking a little too brown to me. I want to add more yellow ochre into it. I want to push it more towards yellow. So let's grab some more yellow ochre out. And this is also a good example. I could see before that I had put in a bigger amount of yellow ochre into that pile, but yellow ochre just doesn't have the same tinting strength as cadmium red, so if I want to push this more towards yellow, let me just put this maybe to the side, then I really have to put more in. Okay, so as you start to mix and become more familiar with your different paints, you're going to start to learn that different pigments have different tinting strength. So a lot of the phalos, for example, are very intense, very high tinting strength, very easy to overpower other colors when you're mixing phalos with other colors, so that's something to be very aware of. The earth tones tend to not be as intense, not a very intense tinting strength, so yellow ochre in particular, because it's also a light color. Yellow is the lightest color in the color spectrum, right? So it's also kind of weaker in that respect. So let's just take a little bit of this and test it out with white, see if we like that. I think even a little bit more yellow ochre in there. Okay. Now a brighter and more intense yellow is going to be the cadmium yellow. You could try that too with this kind of neutral combination. Now I can see that if I scrape this up, you can see that it's a nice kind of yellow brown. That's what we're looking for here. Now you can also be trying out in your portraits, maybe you try some really chromatic color. You're not neutralizing it quite as much. That's totally fine, and that can also really work with whatever artist you're choosing. Just also kind of depends on the artist that you've chosen for your project. Toulouse-Lautrec, again, had very intense chromatic colors, even just pure kind of phthalo green in parts of it. So you might then be deciding to make parts of your shadow or light very intensely chromatic, and that can work. Just always kind of want to be thinking ahead though, kind of be deciding, making informed decisions about your color palette. Okay. Again, mixing out a variety of colors to be using. Okay, or a variety of values to be using. Now I might also decide, let's move this just up over in here, but I might then decide, well, maybe I also want to give myself, next to this little yellow value strain, maybe I want to do something that is a little bit more intensely yellow. So you can make little piles of adjusted colors next to it. You don't have to necessarily mix out a whole value strain of this, but you can just decide, or you can also be doing this as you're testing out your painting, seeing, okay, I want something about this value, but it needs to go a little bit more yellow. I'll mix it right here. Give yourself a little pile of that. Okay, and then last, so if you want to do some cooler colors to be working with, you could combine ultramarine blue and transparent iron oxide, or ultramarine blue and burnt umber together. You can make warm and cool neutral that way. That can give you some cooler neutrals to work with. What I'm going to be mixing right now is actually alizarin crimson and phthalo green for a cooler neutral, because I want something to play off of these colors, and I want part of the light to be going towards some of these pinks, and then I want some of the shadow areas to be going more towards this cool green. And I might have parts of it that go